Welcome to the Airlines podcast series powered by Felsher. Today I've got Nathaniel Felsher on the show. Nate has been, he's a current founder and CEO of CAVU Management Partners, consulting service company, and former president and chief strategy officer of Aimia. Nathaniel, thanks for being on the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So can you share a little bit about your background and how you got to this position, this lovely position that you're currently at?
Of course. So 18 years as an investment banker, last 11 were at Deutsche Bank, where I was the Global Co-Head of Aviation Corporate Investment Banking, focused on M&A and equity transactions, sort of with airlines, aircraft lessors, but then built out a coverage area of all the adjacencies. So from loyalty companies to catering companies to online travel agencies and kind of everything other than the airline as well. And at various times was based in London and New York, but mostly based on planes where, going to 3 continents in 1 week would be typical. And in most years, I would spend more nights on red-eye flights than in hotels.
That's super impressive. A lot of people in this industry, I don't know if you probably heard this, but a lot of people say you're the strategy expert, you're the business models expert in this industry, in the aviation industry. Can you discuss several specific business models that you've seen working for the companies that you consult with in the recent years?
So look, I speaking specifically of like airlines, there's clearly cost-focused legacy carriers, and they're able to extract a revenue premium, and then low-cost carriers that are totally cost-focused and try and stimulate demand by having lower prices. And so from an airline perspective, they're both models kind of are looking for profitability, but go about it in a different way. One looking for a revenue premium and one looking to stimulate by having the lowest costs in a market. So get more travelers as opposed to getting more from each traveler.
Mm-hmm. And in your experience, what are some of the common mistakes that some of those airlines are making in terms of their business models, in terms of what they're trying to achieve, in terms of pricing and costs?
So it's interesting. In the past, airlines have had to focus disproportionately on costs and if trying to get efficiencies out of those costs or from those cost items, because they haven't had good tools to extract revenue. It's revenue management and pricing within the airline space has been a bit of a dark art, and only now are tools kind of catching up with the needs in the sector. And I think that's a function of, frankly, COVID acting as a reset. So what were historical kind of sacred cows and things that you couldn't change now very much are being open to be revisited. And technology is helping to facilitate that.
Mm-hmm. Like in other industries, let's say we're talking about the finance industry, we saw how algo trading, right, has been able to take place and really amplify and optimize the way this industry operates. You talked about COVID. Do you think now is the time to insert algo trading into the aviation industry and finally go all in on it without having it be a sacred cow?
I think that much like pre-algo trading, there was greater inefficiencies between trading, like there were greater spreads between different prices, and that enabled more middlemen. Now that's going to change within, there's a move away from that within airlines and travel more broadly. And that's a function, frankly, of the fact that airlines are the hero brands within the travel space. If you think about an OTA has to build, so an online travel agency has to build a brand to generate traffic, or it has to be the lowest price. The move is passengers are now booking 50+% directly with the airline, but as that moves from 50 towards 100, the airline gets pricing power, the consumer gets a lower price, and unfortunately OTAs business model may be disrupted.
hmm When you mentioned previously, you talked about the middleman in the aviation industry. Were you referring to companies like Skyscanner in particular?
Skyscanner, I think, is different because they don't actually sell airline tickets. Rather, they just enable consumers to compare prices across a number of different online travel agencies and then connect you to an online travel agency or directly to the airline. I think ultimately those sort of price comparisons happen less between online travel agencies ultimately, but between airlines, as frankly it should be.
hmm So when you're looking, you've been in investment banking, Deutsche Bank. We mentioned that previously. In your opinion, from what you're looking from the angles that you're currently seeing, what are the most promising investment opportunities in the aviation industry? We mentioned bringing in algo trading. We mentioned bringing in, dynamic frequency pricing. What else is there that you think can help the aviation industry optimize their processes?
There's a lot, but I think one has to recognize that startups within this space typically underestimate how difficult it is to break into airlines given some of their legacy and rightly resistance to change. So, this is a space that is clearly very tech dependent, but innovation lags, and startups can often be very innovative, but haven't fully built out their tech stack. It's not kind of up to an airline's bulletproof standard that it needs to be. And I think that's where often the challenges for startups really start and then kind of compound over time.
So that's an excellent point. If we look a few years back, we can see the same thing happen in the financial markets, right? We've seen traditional players like Nasdaq, and then we've seen like startups who are trying to to bring trading to the cloud and using algo trading as well. And when I've talked to some of those startups, they've said it was a complete hustle, and it was completely difficult to be able to talk the same language as some of those industry veterans who were not as tech savvy, who did not understand the importance of optimizing their tech stack. What can startups do? Startups that they have clientele in the aviation space. What can they do to kind of bridge that gap with the veterans?
I think that it starts with having a very convincing value proposition so that you can get buy-in from an airline or a travel provider, and then a thoughtful, phased implementation so that there's no cutover, there's no cliff risk. You kind of build comfort with the new product and the new system rather than some of the way it has historically happened between, say, Sabre and Amadeus, where there was a protracted implementation period and then a single cutover date, which just creates, cliff risk. And I think that leads to the less innovation and frankly more fear within the airlines.
One of the reasons to kind of optimize your tech stack as an aviation company, as an airline, is not only on the customer side. Obviously, you want to have your customers feeling better about your product, about the service, about the way they interact, with their whole pricing and booking and all of that. But there's another thing here. We're talking about revenue optimization, right? And at the end of the day, airlines, they want to squeeze as much revenue as possible from the amount of flights that they have from that calendar. Every calendar. I talked to an aviation expert. He basically said, we're looking at our monthly calendar, and we're thinking, how can we extract as much value as possible, from that capacity that we have, right? So how can airlines optimize revenue, and how can they use tech to optimize their revenue on a consistent basis?
Well, so historically they've used models that are based on history, right? Because this Easter shouldn't look that different than last Easter is sort of the theory, and that the way a given route for the last 10 years booked is going to be similar to how it happens now. Now airlines are struggling and needing technology because their networks have become far more dynamic and flexible. So flights are changing at the last minute, and last minute can be defined as starting, say, 6 weeks out.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a need for more flexibility from an operating perspective, and then by extension from a pricing perspective. Because whereas before, and I sort of referenced this earlier with respect to sacred cows, there was a belief the business traveler would come in and book a couple days before departure, and because their travel was so important, they'd be willing to pay any amount. I think that sacred cow has certainly softened, if not completely changed, right? And as you have more customer profiles, you're going to have more demand curves, which means you need to have more flexible pricing, which is leading to kind of a bigger math problem. And that is where technology can absolutely help and needs to help.
Is there any specific, tech solutions right now, specific companies that you see that are making strides in this space, that are helping aviation companies, optimize?
Well, I think Felsher is at the forefront, given its ability to take in different data points and come up with recommendations as to how to change the pricing on various routes as well as availability.
Mm-hmm. If you look at a startup like Felsher, and you're seeing kind of the hurdles and obstacles, in the traditional aviation industry, do you believe that, it's just a matter of time until, every single airline would use a company like Felsher, would use a solution like that?
I think one can go broader than airlines. I think all travel companies could use something like Felsher to help to optimize their pricing. And you're trying to move people at the margin onto different flights, onto later departures, just to play with kind of demand elasticity and price elasticity and price to solve the problem of how do you fill seats at the highest revenue, but also make sure that you are filling those seats.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about loyalty programs, which is a big thing in the travel industry, and even a bigger thing when we niche, right? When we're talking niche about aviation. I travel with Elal, and the loyalty program is one of the things that keep me traveling with Elal, and getting those points, getting those credits. And in the U.S., actually, it's a really big thing, right? You're able to produce tons of credit points on your credit cards to travel, and then you can basically optimize your travel experience in terms of pricing. And there's literally people on TikTok, on Instagram, that they are loyalty program consultants, right? They teach people how they can get more points, get more credit points, all of those hacks and tricks. What do you think? Like, where is that going in terms of loyalty programs? Do you see aviation companies trying to use tech and optimize tech into that as well?
So it's a great question, and frankly a great example of where tech can be helpful. So if you think of somebody such as yourself who is a loyal LL member, I presume have a co-branded credit card, your propensity to choose LL is different than somebody who is not a LL frequent flyer program member. And so, you might be willing to pay more. You might get more benefits. There's sort of a relationship that creates a very different demand and pricing curve. And so, as I think about it, it's on the airline to think of you as a discrete customer and then price and treat you accordingly. And so pricing will certainly be part of that going forward.
Mm-hmm. Solutions like, let's say, Felsher, when you're coming in and you have tons of customers as an airline, and you've got on one side people who are in your loyalty program, and you got on the other side people who are not. is the technology strong enough to be able to make that differentiation? Is the technology strong enough to be able to pinpoint and optimize the pricing models and to adjust to if you are in the loyalty program or if you're not?
Historically, it's been done in a very crude manner.
Mm-hmm.
So, but going forward, I think that it's going to become far more sophisticated with respect to how those demand curves change and kind of that optimization. So, in the past, it's been discounts or coupons, kind of rudimentary selling techniques, or some math on the back end to take a cash fare and turn it into a points fare, but not actually offering much value or innovation to the end user.
Mm-hmm. And how
You
is
know,
that? And how is that? Sorry, go ahead.
uh, and because there's so much on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube with respect to the travel hacks, uh, if and it is such a profitable space for the airlines, that optimization needs to happen for it to continue, for loyalty to continue to grow. Otherwise, I think you're going to see people turned off from airline loyalty programs and move towards credit card loyalty programs, right, which are effectively travel cash banks. So airlines somewhat need to be careful.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between business travel and leisure travel. When we're talking about business travel, we're seeing companies like Trip Actions. Right now, they're named Navan, I think. I don't remember exactly. They rebranded recently. I think Navan. Their whole business is built on the B2B business travel model. And I'm just wondering, in terms of when we're talking about frequency pricing, we're talking about dynamic pricing. What's the difference between a business traveler to someone who is on vacation, for example?
Less and less, I think. uh, the lines are being blurred about when we're working, how we're working, where we're working. And there's sort of a few things that airlines themselves have acknowledged already, but bear repeating. Namely, the day trip business trip is dead, right? Mm-hmm. So on the 6 a.m. flight out of LaGuardia going to Chicago and being on the 7 p.m. back, that's dead. Mm-hmm. Nobody's doing that anymore. Second, the number of people going on business trips is down. And what I mean by that is, when I used to go to meet with clients, I'd bring my VP, my associate, and my analyst often. So we would be 4 people going to a meeting. Now, the analyst, the associate, and the VP aren't interested in travel. They're like, much more efficient to do it on Zoom. And so, the attendees at in-person meetings shrink as well. Mm. So, business travel is very much changing. And frankly, the efficiency of business travel, it's such a penalty to travel. You get an efficiency penalty because you have to be up at 4 a.m. to make a 6 a.m. Like, that's not a great lifestyle. And I think lifestyle matters. And the airlines haven't fully addressed convenience, and so people are reacting by traveling less for business, or at least traveling only when it's absolutely necessary.
Earlier in the conversation, you talked about, when you started out, you were talking about those red eyes. You were talking about, not even sleeping in, but just, going from one flight to the other. How has your lifestyle changed, post-COVID? How does that look like?
My standard for getting on a plane has gone way up. Right? And I'd rather go for a longer trip, even if that means staying over a weekend, than doing 2 trips, in back-to-back weeks, right? Because the chance of a delay, the chance of a cancellation, the time lost, uh, at an airport is material.
Mhm. Understand. And probably your family is supporting that as well, I guess.
Yes.
you know, uh, AI has been taking the world by storm. I'm talking about ChatGPT, specifically, but ChatGPT is just one side of the coin here. AI has been really, making a difference in almost every single industry, even in the most old-fashioned traditional ones. How can, the specific aspect of revenue management in the aviation industry benefit from AI?
I think it can benefit massively because, if you think about manual or semi-automated revenue management, you are only able to scratch the surface of your entire network and sort of actively manage it. And so AI leveraging many more data points than a pricing analyst might can manage maybe not your top uh, 10% or 20% of your network, but the tail much more efficiently. And so all of those connections, flights, where a pricing analyst may look at it every few months, years, not very frequently because it only generates a few passengers a day.
Mm-hmm.
And so you make broad changes on the back. I think that's where AI can be particularly helpful, is really on the smaller markets in the tail of an airline's route network, which
Mm-hmm.
is just today not managed with the level of detail and precision that AI enables you to do. Because if you think of what AI really enables one to do, it's to take many data points and then apply it in a cost-efficient manner to a broad set of, um, in this case, routes, right? But a broad set of solutions, whereas it wouldn't be efficient to do that with human intervention.
Okay, Nate. You know, there's a big gap between traditional airline infrastructures compared to more modern one, or to the ones we wish to go to, right? What are some, and we've also seen a lot of technical issues. We've seen what happened with Southwest this past year, for example. What do companies need to do? What can aviation companies can do to kind of optimize and get to that next level of infrastructure?
So uh, airlines have always had an option to invest in technology, um, or add people to bridge kind of a deficiency in their operations. However, airlines have been cash strapped
Hmm.
by their very nature, most of them. And so historically, they've prioritized adding people instead of making multi-year technological kind of commitments. And where they have made multi-year technological investment commitments, they have relied on IT service providers that have to navigate airline challenges, which is not only agreeing to kind of global standards, but also global standards that are backward compatible to the smallest destination in an airline's network, which, even in this day and age, might have a dial-up internet connection,
Hmm.
right? So this is not particularly conducive to innovative solutions. So they've typically just added people to it. I think what's happened is, post COVID, the airlines have lost their muscle memory
Hmm.
with respect to used to operate in a kind of technologically backwards or suboptimal way, because the airlines are 24-hour operations, and they were able to just get by, and they got by because there was one person in the call center who knew exactly what to do when this problem arose. Well, during COVID, that person left the airline. And so now when that problem arises, the airline's like, okay, well, the call center workers aren't as well trained. They've lost something. There's there it is harder because airlines have had to restaff post-COVID, and you're staffing with newer people who are less familiar with working in kind of DOS-based reservation systems, which are still around today, particularly with some of the more complex issues that people might encounter with airlines. And so there's been historic underinvestment. Airlines now are at a breaking point, and they know that they can't just throw bodies at it to get to a solution. So they're having to really look at their procedures and see what can be optimized and what can be done better. And I think from a customer perspective, there's also been a change, which is not only have travelers also lost some muscle memory with respect to standing in lines and getting irritated and sort of that general stress of travel, but customers have also their expectations of what they can do in a self-service way have gone up. And as a result of that, I think customers are not more demanding, but just want a consistent experience with how they would be treated with Amazon or other e-commerce retailers.
So you mentioned, severe underinvestment on the tech stack side on airlines, right? How can they bridge that gap? Does that mean that they need to hire more in-house, chief continuous improvement managers or something of that sort? How can startups help bridge that gap? And how can the in-house team in those airlines, kind of understand that they need to implement, tech? They need to. The old infrastructures are not going to work anymore. We've seen what happened with Southwest. We've seen, the impact, that can make. And we've also seen the positive impacts that, adding new tech stacks can help. Where do you think that comes in? How can we help those aviation companies?
So I think that that there's going to be a lot more integration that's done in-house. That innovation is going to come from startups, and airlines are going to get better working with startups going forward as this rightly becomes core to their operation.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, airlines being cash strapped, right? You talked about the financial aspects here, and then, the solution was throwing more bodies, adding more people instead of improving the tech. Is there some examples of airlines that have been improving their tech stack? I'm thinking about, Virgin. I'm thinking about the whole, what Richard Branson has been able to push, through their innovative stuff. Is there any other airlines that you think are making big strides on that aspect?
I think many are trying in fits and starts, but Virgin has clearly benefited from its relationship with Delta, and from a technological perspective, and that's I think low cost carriers as well, given their comparatively more straightforward operation, have also been able to integrate technology at a more rapid rate.
Okay, so my next question to you is this. We talked about AI previously in the conversation. We talked about the importance. We talked about the impact. I want to use your strategy mind. I want to use your strategy experience to kind of attract value from this. When we're talking about, how AI, the touch points, the multi-layer touch points that AI has in terms of the whole experience, we're talking about AI for customer experience. We're talking about AI for the loyalty programs. We're talking about the high frequency pricing and how AI can be inserted into that. What else, when we're talking about a holistic solution, where else do you think AI is able to provide value in this industry?
All over the place. I think that, I think that AI is going to be able to personalized products, and there's been a lot of talk in travel about personalization, but AI is a game changer because it can personalize at an individual level, offers the way it has not been possible to do in the past. And that also speaks to so I think some really exciting elements for airlines who embrace AI, because we're very early days in AI. We're very early days in kind of airlines stepping up their technological kind of game, as well as their ownership of the customer. Because I referenced it before with respect to airlines having outsized brands. You referenced it in the context of loyalty, that you're loyal to a specific airline. That creates a relationship which, if the airline delivers a kind of a full product suite, I think your natural place to go is towards the airline to purchase other travel elements. And so AI is going to be part and parcel of those sort of evolutions. And it's worth pointing out that people typically purchase their plane ticket in advance of purchasing it's their sort of first thing they buy when they or when they start to purchase a trip. And so from that sort of privileged position enables airlines to sell a ticket, then sell a hotel, then a car rental, and maybe some excursions as well. AI is going to fundamentally enable and change that type of personalization. And the relationship is disproportionately strong with the airline.
So you're saying that, in the future, Elal will not only be helpful, in flying me to a location, it will have a complete holistic solution that Elal will be able to, utilizing AI, would be able to plan my whole trip, including what the car rental, that I'm going to use, the hotel that I'm going to stay at, the 2 or 3, leading tourist sites that I'm going to visit. You're saying that Elal will have those capabilities in the future.
They may have elements of that even today, but I think that relationship with LL, given AI, is only going to get stronger, right? Because your natural step, your first thought of loyalty goes to LL, not to Hilton or Marriott, or there's a different affinity, and I think they're going to capture value from that, and AI is going to enable that for sure.
I have another interesting, curveball for you. Okay, this is something that
Great.
I've had a friend ask me, and we've kind of been talking about that behind the scenes in regards to this podcast. He told me, and it's someone he's in tech, he's in the auto tech industry. He basically told me, how come is it that we don't have an Uber for airlines yet? A one-click solution, right? That there's a one-click, kind of optimized process where you can get the best deals right at the spot, instead of actually, logging on to any separate, airlines or, airline, right? Their own website, or not using Skyscanner because that doesn't help you as well. That's not a one-click solution. Do you think we're going to be seeing an Uber-like framework for airlines, for travel?
Absolutely. I think that there's a number of steps to get there, but ultimately that requires a level of trust, a level of understanding of you as the consumer, right? So that if you think about what's required to get there, if you're flying to pick a destination at, let's say, Tel Aviv to London, okay, and the system has to know that you have a preference for LL, but that preference has some price elasticity. So if LL is $500 more than British Airways, that one-click solution might be British Airways because the price difference is so substantial. And oh, by the way, to bridge the fact that you're going to fly British Airways instead of LL. You're going to the system recognizes that your preference is for an aisle seat, and that you check a bag, and so it's comparing the British Airways with an aisle seat that you may have had to pay for and a bag that you would have had to pay for to the LL price premium where you would have gotten the aisle seat and the bag for free because of your status. Okay, so it's sort of the same comparisons that we would do, but it's a few steps further down the line, so that that recommendation it is both explainable as well as is thoughtful to you. And I think the corollary is what the airlines used to do. The airlines used to play a game, which is back in the 1970s and before, you'd have business travelers that would say to their assistant, book me on the first flight from LaGuardia to Chicago. Okay? And the way it was listed in the GDSs was by time of departure. Okay? And so United and American, who were the dominant carriers on that route, would play a game. LaGuardia opens at 6 a.m. Because of that one statement, book me on the first flight to Chicago, when the admin would call a travel agent and say, I need the first flight to Chicago for this person, airlines would start putting a flight in at 5:59, at 5:55, at 5:52, because there was value in showing up first in the reservation system and being responsive to that question. Today, people, there's a little more sophistication with respect to the question, but the question still stands, is when we go out and look for flights, the reason we don't have one click is that there's additional analysis that we all sort of do other than just price at different points in the booking journey. And I think that one click will happen when the systems get good enough and there is trust that you're getting a fair price for a service you want, at times within reason that work.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Yep. Nat, thank you so much. I've just have one. I've a set of 5 quick fireside questions for you. You've been so generous with your time. I think you've put on a show here. With the amount of value, I think people can actually build a course around this conversation. So first of all, I just want to thank you about that. And are you cool with doing a quick fireside questions?
Sure, let's go.
Let's go. Okay, so what is your favorite book? What book has kind of impacted your career the most?
Probably Atlas Shrugged.
Mm-hmm. Love it. I love The Fountainhead, also by Ayn Rand. She's amazing. What productivity hack or tip has helped your career the most?
Recently, it is turning off my cell phone and turning off notifications for new email, so I can still delve in and work.
If you had to choose one innovation in the aviation industry, only one that will be implemented across the board, all companies are going to adapt, what would that be?
A method to allow the airlines, as mentioned, kind of as the hero brands, to own more of the journey. Mm-hmm. I think they do a lot of work for low to negative compensation.
We're all human beings. Human beings, especially in business, are prone to stress and to stressful situations. Do you do anything to help you with that? Any meditation, yoga, some trick that has helped you throughout your journey?
So 2 things. I enjoy cycling. Uh, and I'm a private pilot for fun. And quite literally, when one takes off, you leave your problems behind.
That's a good one. And my last question for you is this, you work with young entrepreneurs, you work with seasoned entrepreneurs as well. What's the number one advice you give to any entrepreneur out there?
Uh, Understand what differentiates your proposition and make sure that you have you're solving a real problem.
Awesome, Nate. Nate Felsher, thank you so much for being on this show. People can go and follow you on LinkedIn. And thanks again. Thanks for the amazing value that you've provided here.
Pleasure. I've enjoyed it.